Advent, as I said, is the anticipation of Jesus. It's awaiting the arrival. So much of our scriptures in this season of Advent will take us back into the Old Testament. The people who were waiting for God. God had spoken to them. God had given them the law. He had given them revelation. He had sent to them prophets. And yet they were waiting for God. They were waiting for God to do something that they weren't even fully sure what He was going to do, how He was going to come. And so for the season of Advent, we wait with them. And so for us today, we're going to journey back about 1,000 years before Jesus is born. It's easy to say 1,000 years. Sometimes we forget how long 1,000 years is. 1,000 years before Jesus was born in Bethlehem, you have the great King David. Many of you have heard of King David, who wrote many of the Psalms, who was the second king of Israel. David was a forerunner, you may say, to Jesus, who comes in the line of David, also often called the son of David as the Messiah. But David was not a likely king. In fact, he was an unlikely king, the youngest of his siblings, who when the prophet Samuel comes to anoint the king, he looks at all the other brothers and he goes, "Oh, Jesse, where's the last one? Isn't there one more? Is there another brother?" And they have to go out into the field to the where the shepherd is, and that's where David is the youngest who's out tending the sheep, and they bring him forward, and David is anointed king. A beautiful, unlikely story of a king who becomes the great and mighty King David, who Jesus is after this line. But it's the prophet Samuel who anoints him. And I don't want to look at Samuel today, but in fact, backing up from Samuel to look at Samuel's mother. Samuel's mother was a woman by the name of Hannah, and I would love to tell a little bit of Hannah's story today. You see, today in Advent, this theme is hope. Morgan, a few moments ago, lit the first candle of Advent, and the theme is hope, Advent being a season of hope. So in the light of hope, I'd love to tell a few stories today, the first being that of Hannah. Hannah was a young woman. She was married to a man who was also married to another woman. Now, for the sake of helping us out today, I'm not going to go through all the other names that we may get mixed up. So I'm just going to focus on Hannah, and we'll say the other man, the other woman, the husband, that type of thing. They do have names. They are given to us. Hannah is a young woman married to a man who is also married to another woman. So this man has two wives. This is pretty normal in this day and age. Not this day and age. This day and age. The history that we're looking at 1,000 years before Christ. This man was married to two women. Now, this other woman was a wonderful woman, we're told. And we're told she was a wonderful woman because of what she could do, which the primary thing was that she could provide for her husband children. At that time, this was certainly the highest of callings for a woman, to be able to provide a son, an heir, to continue the name, the legacy of their husband. And this is what she was able to do. And she had several children, sons and daughters, with this man, her husband. Hannah, on the other hand, was unable. Hannah could not have any children. It tells us that Hannah was barren, that her womb was closed. Hannah was distraught and depressed. She felt worthless, unable to provide a son for her husband, but also unable to provide a child for herself, to be a mother, to provide and care for and raise up a child or children. She felt worthless. She felt useless. Now, on top of the feelings that she's already working through, of course, you can imagine the stress and the strain, the feeling of anxiety and depression and worthlessness that she feels. On top of all that, this other woman would ridicule her, would put her down. It says she would disregard her. She would call her out for her inability to provide a child, of course, something Hannah had no control over. And yet here this other woman, married to this man, whom also was married to Hannah, was providing children and performing all of the duties that a wife should perform according to their customs. It tells us that Hannah wept bitterly, is the word the scriptures use. Hannah wept bitterly. I wonder if you can think back to the last time you wept bitterly. That may be a difficult moment, of course, to go back to. Maybe it was a long time ago. Maybe it was quite recently. The last time, not just a quick tear came to your eye, but a moment where you slunched over and your shoulders bounced and you wept bitterly of something that was so sad in your life. Maybe it was the passing of a loved one, a hurt, a pain, a broken relationship, loss of a job or career, a bad health diagnosis. I don't know what it could have been for you. Maybe it was recent, maybe it was a long time. I want you to just put yourself in that moment, if you could, as we relate to Hannah, who feels totally useless and worthless and hopeless. And it tells us she weeps bitterly. Once a year, the family, Hannah and the husband and the wife and the other children, they would travel to Shiloh. Now Shiloh, just to give a little frame of reference, Shiloh is an area in Samaria. So as we've talked about before, the northern area is Israel. This is Galilee, where Jesus would have his ministry later on. Galilee, then Samaria beneath that, and then Judea, which is where Jerusalem is beneath that. Shiloh in the middle there in Samaria. Now, the Israelites had come into the promised land, right? This is the story of Joshua and the judges as they come out of captivity, out of the wilderness, into the promised land. They kind of established themselves, but this is before King David, of course, is on the scene. So before the temple is built under King Solomon, and before Jerusalem is really what Jerusalem would become. This is before all of this. And so Shiloh is the place where they've built this tabernacle. Now, they had a tabernacle they would build up and be able to tear down and move it about as they were nomadic people in the wilderness. But in Shiloh, they built somewhat of a permanent, it wanted to stay a little bit longer, a little bit more permanent structure of the tabernacle. We might call it the temple. In the scripture, it even mentions the word temple, but this is pre-temple. This is tabernacle. This is where God would dwell. This is where His Spirit would dwell. This is where the Ark of the Covenant would sit. The Ark of the Covenant where God's presence would dwell. In fact, later on, the Philistines would come, destroy the tabernacle at Shiloh, and steal the Ark of the Covenant, taking it away, a great mystery of the world. But they would go to the tabernacle, this family, Hannah, her husband, and the rest of them. And they would go there, of course, to perform their sacrifices at the altar, meet with the priest. This was their custom. Now, one such year, Hannah, there at the tabernacle, decided to pray for what she was longing for, what she was hoping for. All right, we're going to look at just a few verses in the midst of this story. This is all found in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 1. Our first scripture is 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 10 and 11. It says, "She, Hannah, was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life." Hannah's praying this prayer there in the tabernacle. Lord, if you would just hear my words amidst my tears, I feel worthless, I feel hopeless, I feel distressed, I feel lost. Lord, what is my purpose? Again, maybe you can identify. Now, as she prays, she makes this vow, she makes this promise. Lord, if you give me a son, I will give him back to you, which she means, of course. This isn't an empty promise, an empty phrase heaped up. She means this. I will give this son, if you grant me this prayer, I will give him back to you. Now, what's going on at the same time is the high priest is a man named Eli. And Eli is looking through the doorway, through the doorpost, and he sees Hannah there praying. But Hannah's praying a little bit differently than what typically is done. See, in our day and age, a lot of times we will pray silently. Anyone ever pray and they're silent? It's kind of praying in their head. Maybe your lips move. Have you never do that? Your lips are moving, but you're quiet. That's a pretty modern thing, to have this inner dialogue. That was not really a thing in this day and age. When you prayed, you would speak out loud because I want to make sure God hears me. So I'm going to talk out loud and I'm going to pray out loud. Also, maybe the other people can hear me because they can know how holy I am by my prayers, right? That's what the Pharisees. But Hannah's doing what we kind of tend to do now. Her head is bowed, her eyes likely closed, perhaps, and she's praying and her lips are moving, but there's no sound coming out. So Eli looks through and sees her and he's perplexed and he assumes, well, she's had some strong wine this morning. She's had some strong drink. She's a little bit intoxicated is what he feels is going on. It says it this way, 1 Samuel chapter 1, again, verses 15 to 17. But Hannah answered to Eli, No, my lord, I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman. For all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. Then Eli answered, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him. Eli, a wonderful man. Eli arrives thinking, okay, something's going on with this woman. There's some funny business going on. And he approaches her and finds out, okay, no, she's just praying. She's feeling anxiety. She's feeling vexation, it tells us. She's struggling with something and she's pouring her heart out. You can even hear Hannah as she says, I'm not worthless. Almost as if she's trying to convince herself. I'm not worthless. Of course, we know that's how she feels. And Eli decides in this moment to bless and to affirm this prayer. May the God of Israel, may God hear your prayer and may he grant the request that you have made to him. Go in peace. Eli gives this blessing to Hannah in this moment. I'd love to pause Hannah's story for a minute and tell you a little story of my own. My wife and I were married 2010. We just celebrated our 15-year anniversary. Seems crazy that it's been that long, back in May. Our first year of marriage was awesome. It was wonderful. We both worked at a church just down this, and we lived just down the street. So we could walk down to work. We walked down the street and we could go to work. We went out to eat every meal. We had pots and pans at home, I think. We didn't really use them, which is funny now because Justin cooks so often now. We would go out to eat every day. We had money to spend because we didn't have all these kids to spend it on, so we could go out to eat and buy TVs and things that we needed. Now, we weren't rich, let me be clear, but we didn't have all these kids to take our money. Life was wonderful. Life was great. We were excited. The first big hurdle that we faced, right? You're always going to face hurdles. The first big hurdle that we faced was 1 year into marriage when we made the decision to move to a new city. At the time, we lived in Spartanburg, South Carolina, on the upstate, and we moved all the way to New Orleans, Louisiana. It was about 10 hours away, and I knew this was a big deal. Here I was, who had just married this woman who had a great family, and I was taking her from her family, moving her pretty far away. That's a risky move for those of you that maybe have done that before. So we moved 10 hours away, and this is for me to continue and finish some of my schooling, going to the seminary there in New Orleans. Now, I've told the story of college before, and some of you are familiar, some of you are not. I'll save the rest of that for another time. But we were moving to New Orleans for me to finish school, and during the second year of marriage, the challenges began to ramp up. We went from having enough money to not having enough money. I was in school full-time, way over full-time, taking too many classes, trying to finish. Justin was working, trying to provide for us. Every Friday, we would save up about $6 and go down to the Taco Bell down the street, and that was our treat for the week. This was our life. We struggled. We were dirt poor in this time of our life. About a year into the journey in New Orleans, we made the decision through a lot of circumstances, we were going to be moving back to South Carolina to help with a church, back to Charleston. It's where we lived before we moved here. And as we were anticipating the move back to South Carolina, a little bit closer to some family, a little bit closer to what we were familiar with, we also made a big decision in our life. Jess and I both came from great families. I came from a big family. She came from an even bigger family. We had great siblings. Our families loved the Lord. We were blessed to grow up in church. All these things were good. And because of all those things, it led both of us to feel as though we were excited and ready to have children. It was time. We had been married about 2 years, and we said, okay, now it's time. Let's start trying. Let's have a child. Let's have our first kid. Well, we started trying, and it took a little while. It took longer than I thought, at least, that it would. I had many friends in high school and college that were not trying to get pregnant, and yet did. I thought this was an easy thing to do. And yet, week after week, month after month, time went by, and it was taking longer than I thought. But finally, Justin pops out of the bathroom there with a little test, and it's like, hey, it's positive, pregnant. So at this point, we're only like a week or so away from moving back to South Carolina, back to Charleston. Hey, we're pregnant. It's like exciting. We're telling everyone it's great news. We go to the doctor, and the doctor says, the baby isn't measuring quite as far along as you might have thought he should have, or he or she, whatever, should have. So you're probably just not as far along. And we were like, okay, that sounds cool. No big deal. A few days later, we go for a visit with some friends. Some friends of ours are going to Panama City Beach. It's not too far from New Orleans, and we drive up to Panama City just to relax, to celebrate, to share the news. Hey, this is great. We're about to move back and all this thing. It's all great. It's all wonderful. And while we were there, Jesselyn gets a call from the doctor. It says, hey, we've been running the tests, checking your blood, all these kind of things. There's a potential that this could be what's called an ectopic pregnancy, which I don't have to go into what all that means, but it's not good news, and it's very dangerous for the woman, for Jesselyn. They said, you need to come in to the doctor. And we're like, well, we're not even home. We're not here. We're not there. We're not home. We're far away. We're several hours away. What should we do? And they said, you need to find a clinic, find a doctor's office, find a hospital. You need to go in and make sure that that's not what this is. So here we are in Panama City Beach. We don't know anyone there. We don't know any hospitals. We don't know any doctors. We're looking up clinics. We're trying to find who maybe goes along with our insurance or who has an ultrasound machine. All these things that we weren't anticipating doing while we were in Panama City for a few days. And here we are driving to this clinic. I'll never forget this clinic and this storefront with these glass windows. It felt very cold. Felt unfamiliar. And we go in, and there's the technician or the doctor, whatever it may be, and Jess gets the ultrasound, and it's in that little room, and I sat on this little rolly chair that I'll remember the words that I still remember when the doctor says, there's no baby. There's no baby. I don't see one. There's no baby there. At the time, it seems funny to say now, but at the time, neither Jess or I really knew anyone that had had a miscarriage before. Now, we probably did know someone who had had one, but we didn't know that we knew. My mom, who had had kids, we didn't know that she had had a miscarriage. We weren't aware of that. Her mom, who had had many kids, we weren't aware that she had had a miscarriage. Jesselyn has two older sisters who had had several kids, and they had not had a miscarriage. I had an older sister-in-law, and they had had kids and not had a miscarriage. We were unfamiliar with anyone in our sphere that had walked through this, so it wasn't something that was in our minds. It was an option of something that was going to happen. And yet here we are in this cold office talking to a stranger, just saying there's no baby. And man, that's like a, punch in the gut. We get back to New Orleans. We finish packing up our apartment. We're moving to Charleston, which we're excited about all this, and then this is thrown into the middle of it. It got a little worse. Jesselyn ended up not passing this baby as she was supposed to and had to have an operation. The D&C, if you've ever heard of that, is they clean the woman out. Once again in a new city, we didn't know anyone. Now it's in these moments, I remember thinking in these moments, these terribly negative thoughts, these hopeless thoughts. Thoughts like, well, maybe we won't be able to have kids. Maybe that's not God's plan for us. Maybe the plans that we had weren't the same as the ones that God had for us. We both did our best to follow Jesus at the time. We both trusted God, and maybe our plans that we had weren't the same as the ones that God had for us. Maybe we wouldn't be able to have kids. Maybe there was something wrong with me. Maybe there was something wrong with her. Maybe there was something wrong with the compatibility, but we were unable to have kids. That's what my fear was. That's what I thought in the moment, and you're just left in that moment wondering, what if? And why not? And why us? As this little baby had not made it, not survived. Maybe for you today, you're in that place right now. Maybe you're in that place today. Maybe this isn't a 15-year-old story for you. Now, this doesn't have to be about children. It can be. But you could be feeling this about many things in your life. You're hoping for something and you're unsure if it will ever come in the way that you're wanting it to come. You're hoping for a spouse. You're hoping for a good health report. You're hoping for the career, for the job. You're hoping for certain things, and maybe right now you feel as though they've missed you. You've missed them. You're not in line with what you think God ought to do in your life, and maybe you feel this way today. Depressed, angry, bitter, sad, hopeless. I remember feeling hopeless. I remember asking the doctor, was there something we should have done different? Was there something that she should have done, I should have done? Was there something else we could have done? And there was never a good answer to that. No, it's just one of those things that happen, they would say. It just leaves you feeling worthless, hopeless, this way that Hannah felt, not having a child, hopeless. And maybe today you're left in this place where you feel hopeless. You know that Advent is a season of hope. Amen? Advent is a season of hope. It's a season where we hope for God to come and do something that only God can do. We hope for the promise of God even when we aren't fully sure what it will look like. To hope for God, to hope in God. This is where the people of the Old Testament were left. They were hoping for God to do something. Save us! Hosanna! Is what they would yell. Save us, God. They didn't know how, when, where. But they had a hope that was in God. Now back to the story of Hannah. It tells us this in chapter 1, verse 20. And in due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son. And she called his name Samuel, for she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. The name Samuel sounds like that Hebrew word. For I have asked for him from the Lord. She was given a son. In fact, she would go on to have many sons and daughters, it tells us. The Lord opens her womb, the scriptures say. He answers the prayer that she had been longing for, praying for, hoping for, that the prophet or that the priest Eli had come alongside of her and echoed this prayer. God had answered this prayer and given her a son. But remember, Hannah had made a vow. She said, if you give me a son, I will give him back to you. And this wasn't just theoretical speech. She actually does this. They travel to Shiloh once again, back to the tabernacle. Once Samuel is weaned, he's probably about 2 years old. She travels back to Shiloh to the tabernacle, and she gives him to the Lord, literally. Samuel would be raised in the tabernacle by Eli and by the other priests and the other helpers and workers. He would stay there and be trained and grow up in the way of the Lord, becoming eventually a prophet unto the Lord. This was the gift that she gives back to the Lord after the Lord had given the gift to her. She didn't receive this gift that she had prayed for and then clench her fist tight to say, no, now this is mine, which is what we're tempted to do, by the way. She left her hands open and said, Lord, if you give me this, I promise I will give him right back. And she does. And she would visit her son Samuel once a year when she went to the tabernacle and pray with him. And she loved him dearly. And Samuel would be raised to become a mighty man of God, fulfilling a purpose and anointing kings. This prophet Samuel. Now for us in our story, many of you know us and you know our 4 kids that roam around the halls that could run in at any moment. So you kind of know how the story ended, or at least how it's currently ended. We ended up having 4 children. Now, what you may not know is that throughout the journey of our 4 children, we would go on to have 3 more miscarriages. After we had May, our oldest, we thought, okay, those days are over. We had this weird little hiccup, this problem. We got over it. Now we've had a child. And so now it's all going to be good. And yet we would go on to have 3 more miscarriages amongst our 4 healthy children. So for us, we've had 4 healthy children that many of you have known and have met, and we have 4 that never quite made it. 4 miscarriages in the midst of 4 children. You see, sometimes when God answers your prayer the way that you want Him to, it doesn't mean that pain and suffering are necessarily over. It doesn't mean that pain and suffering are over just because God answers the prayer that you are wanting to. In fact, that's life. There's sadness and there's joy and there's hope and there's hopelessness and there's bitterness and there's anger, and this is all woven together. We don't get to separate them all apart. You might look back on your year and go, it's been a wonderful year, lots of great things, but that doesn't mean terrible things haven't happened in the middle of the year. You may look back on the year and go, this has been a terrible year. It doesn't mean there hasn't been joyful moments throughout. Even in our day to day, the good and the bad, the joy and the sadness, as you know, these are all woven together. This is life. This is the path that we have as humans, feeling these emotions, these ups and these downs. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. We experience anger and sadness, joy, all woven together. This is life. And here's the thing. I want to close talking about this idea. Our hope is not about achieving a certain outcome. I think that's actually a narrow view of hope. To pray for, to hope for the certain thing, and then to get the thing. Our hope is actually much greater, much bigger than hoping for a certain outcome. You see, I'm not here to tell you today that you're going to get the child, or the marriage, or the job, or the health report, or whatever it may be that is weighing on your shoulders today. I'm not here to promise that to you. I can't promise it to you. I want you to know that I want to pray alongside of you to achieve that, to reach that, to get that. I'm all for you, and I want you to have those blessings. But sometimes we don't. And when we have placed our hope in a certain outcome, heartache can come. In fact, this was a story that's in line with what the Jews experienced in the Old Testament. They hoped for God to come. They hoped for this Messiah, but it turns out they were actually hoping more for what the Messiah would do for them than actually just hoping in the Messiah. So when Jesus comes and He doesn't do the things that they thought Jesus ought to do, He doesn't raise the army, He doesn't kill the Romans, when He doesn't take up the sword, when He doesn't make them a great nation again, they're going, okay, He's not doing what we thought the Messiah ought to do, and they disregarded Him. See, their hope all along in the Old Testament, many times and in many ways, was not just about the coming of God. It was about God coming so that He could do something, that He could provide a certain outcome. And if we're honest, most of the times we hope for something, we're actually hoping for a specific outcome. I'm guilty of this as much as you are. We're hoping for a specific outcome, when the reality is we are called to hope in the Lord. Advent is about hoping in Jesus, not a specific outcome. Is your hope in Jesus? Now, maybe you hear me say that and you're going, Chris, what really does that mean? That just sounds like some Christianese. Anyone else speak Christianese? I'm pretty good at speaking Christianese. Put your hope in Jesus, not in the outcome. Okay, that sounds good, it sounds right, but what really does that mean? Because Advent is about putting your hope in Jesus. I want you to think about it this way. I have hope in my wife, Jesslyn. Now, Jesslyn's not my eternal hope. My greater hope is in Jesus. I'm not her eternal hope either. Hers is in Jesus as well. But I do believe that marriage, as Paul the Apostle would say, is like a mystery unto the gospel. It's a mystery to show the world, okay, the way that we love and serve one another is the way that Christ loved and served the church. It's a picture of that. And how Christ continues to forgive us the same way that I continue to forgive her and she continues to forgive me. It's a glimpse, it's a picture of this. As a pastor, I've sat across the table, the lunch table, the coffee table, from many people who are distraught, in a place maybe similar to Hannah, or similar to where we were when we lost our first baby. A lot of times it's men. I'm sitting across from a man, and the man is just head hanging low, tears in his eyes often. And yet this man has all of the things. He has a nice house. He has a nice car. He has a great job and makes lots of money. They go on nice vacations together. He's got the wife and the kids. He's got all the stuff that you think a man could want in life, and yet he's hanging his head low because he's looking at me across the table saying, I'm on the brink of divorce. I have heard this hundreds of times, sadly. Chris, I'm on the brink of divorce. I don't know what happened. We have all of the things. We have all of the stuff. We have what we thought we wanted to have, and yet the relationship that my spouse and I have is crumbling and falling apart, and we're strangers and we don't know each other. This is what this gentleman is feeling sitting across the table from me. And inadvertently, whether they realized it or not, they had put their hope not actually in the person, the relationship of the spouse, but they had put it in a specific hope for an outcome, that we would have or achieve certain things. And all those things aren't fully supportive of what this relationship is intended to be. And then there's in those moments, sometimes I know what to say and sometimes I don't. But I've said numerous times as I've felt blessed in that moment, and I've said this before, I said, Jesslyn and I, we love each other so much. And in fact, we would be happy to live in a cardboard box underneath a bridge if we were together. And I've shared this to some men before, who it always catches them off guard. The truth of the matter is, for Jess and I, we bring each other joy merely because we are together. Our hope being in one another, not in the outcome. Maybe we didn't have the kids or the nice house. You see, as I'm sitting across the table from these men, I don't have any of that stuff. I don't have a nice house, a nice car, all the gadgets, I don't have all those things that the world has to offer. I've worked in ministry all my life. I've never made a lot of money. I don't think I ever will. But there's a relationship with me and my spouse, with me and Jesslyn, that we love one another, that we find joy in one another, that we find hope in one another. And even if we're living in a cardboard box underneath the bridge, that hope is still there because it's not in a certain outcome. It is in one another. In a similar way, our hope ought to be in Jesus. Not just what we think Jesus can do for us. For the gift or the blessing or the money or the fortune or the health it's not just the things that we hope Jesus can bring us. Is it just in Jesus? And if it's me and Jesus, that is enough. That is the hope that Advent talks about. That is the hope that God will come and that God will be, and then it's me and God, and when me and God and I, and we're together, and there's relationship, and it's just being in the presence of God. Is that enough? The same way that me and Jesslyn can be in one another's presence if we don't have any of the other stuff, but yet there's hope and joy there. I believe that's a picture of what we can have in Jesus. And too many of us place our hope in a specific outcome. And if we don't get the kids, or if we don't get the spouse, or if we don't get the job, if we don't get the health report, if we don't get the thing, then our hope crumbles and we realize it was never actually in Jesus, it was in what we hoped that He could bring us. And I want us to have a real hope today, not a fleeting hope. I want to end today mentioning one more scripture. Jeremiah is likely the author of the book of Lamentations. One of the shortest books in the Bible, and oftentimes one of the books that's looked over the most, skipped over the most. I don't think the modern church is very good at lamenting. We seem to always want to be excited and geared up, and here we go, and sometimes it's okay to be sad and upset and angry. Sometimes it's good to lament. And the book of Lamentations is Jeremiah, who lives during a great turmoil. Judah is being conquered by Babylon. The city is being destroyed. The temple is being destroyed. All his friends and family are being exiled 1,000 miles away to Babylon. Life is ending as he knew it. And in that moment, he sits down and writes Lamentations as he weeps bitterly and as he understands the difficulty of all that life is. And he laments. It's the whole book, but there's such a beautiful passage right in the middle. Lamentations chapter 3. Verses 21 to 24, Jeremiah writes this. He says, "But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope." He has hope because this comes to mind. What comes to mind? The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul, therefore I will hope in him. Right in the middle of all these laments, one of the most hopeful verses in all the Bible. It didn't have to do with his surroundings. It didn't have to do with the circumstances that he faced, because all of that was still crumbling. Still being exiled, still being destroyed, still losing his city, still losing his family, still losing all these things. All that still happened. And yet he remembers in the midst of those things, whether he achieves the outcomes of the stuff that he's wanting for or not, he remembers that my hope, our hope, this is the same hope, is in the Lord. That the steadfast love of the Lord will never cease. That he is our portion. I pray in this Advent season you would be reminded that Jesus is your portion. That you actually don't need anything more. And when you get to the place where you realize I don't need anything more, that's when we start to see some of the blessings that were already there to begin with. And we see them more as blessings when they were disguised as just normal stuff. Oh, these blessings have been here all along, when you realize that it's Jesus is all you need. I want to end today with a quote from the great Nelson Mandela, who fought much racism and oppression in South Africa. Nelson Mandela says this: "May your choices reflect your hope, not your fears." Nelson Mandela was persecuted, betrayed, spent many years in prison, eventually was let out and became president, leader of the nation there in South Africa. He says, may your choices reflect your hope. He held on to a hope that the races could be reconciled. He held on to a hope that things could be fixed in his nation. He says, let your hope determine your choices. May they come from that, not your fears. For us, many times it's our fears that guide us. It's our fears that cause us to step in the path that we're going. And when we look back over our path, we see that all the turns that we made were out of fear. And I pray Advent's a reminder that may our steps come out of hope. May our choices be stepped toward hope, not towards trying to avoid something else, but may we walk in hope. And not the hope of a certain outcome, but the hope of Jesus. Amen.